About 25 years ago, I was attending a staff meeting. The topic was literature and writing in the classroom. Throughout the day, I'd excitedly anticipated attending the meeting, as literature, language, writing, or these things are a passion of mine. And the presenter was touted as having extensive experience in language acquisition and the correlations between reading and writing. Ooh, my cup runneth over. I was so excited. As it turns out, our presenter was there as a result of an agreement. She'd promised a presentation in every school in the district after they'd agreed to purchase her program. Now, that had the potential of being all well and good, but it wasn't long after she began her presentation that I detected a flaw, a major flaw. That is, her philosophy on language and learning. In a nutshell, according to, quote, studies she'd done, children become better writers when they are uninhibited. Her claim was only correct them when what they say and or write has no possible translation. Otherwise, leave them be. Don't give in to your inclination to explain what you believe to be necessary corrections. If they write, I am happy using a lowercase I, don't say a word. If the subject-verb conjugation is clearly off, let it be. My blood was boiling. This is called free writing, I thought. And she expects us to see this as a final draft? In addition, I was quickly understanding that she was taking second language acquisition methods and applying them to first language writing methods. What the? Now, you may have surmised that this pertained to elementary age students. No, this pertained to teenagers. According to her philosophy, we were expected, despite their largely inaccurate use of grammar and punctuation and just general writing skills, we were expected to grant passing grades to these students. In her study, she used many of the hypotheses of a well-known linguistic expert named Stephen Krashen to substantiate her claims. As it turns out, I had just recently completed a master's program in multilingual education. My master's thesis for that program was titled The Effect of a Reading and Writing Program on the Reading and Writing Scores of Children. And the core literature that I studied was from that of none other than, wait for it, Stephen Krashen. At the risk of sounding braggadocious, I knew just about everything there was to know about the theories of the man, so the more this, quote, expert expounded on the topic, the closer I came to losing my mind. Long story short, I spent the next several weeks in the offices of my colleagues, urging them to think deeply about the very real consequences of following such a program. Luckily and largely, my argument was effected. Her textbooks became dust-laden in fairly short order. Whew, that was a close call. The importance of clear and effective communication cannot be overstated. We communicate in lots of ways from the moment our days begin until they end. From our conversations with roommates, family, friends, coworkers, to our to-do lists, our text messages, emails, presentations, social media posts. Communication shapes much of who we are. And we don't want who we are to be inadvertently tainted by careless mistakes due to either a lack of effort or simply as a result of etiquette ignorance. After all, our reputations could be on the line. For example, have you ever received an email or a text that reeked of rudeness, only to find out later that what you took as rude wasn't at all the intention? The problem is that sometimes we aren't given the opportunity to find out that a seemingly rude message wasn't intended to be rude, though let's face it, most of the time they are. I can't tell you how many student emails I've received over the course of the years, the decades, that set me back a bit, only to find out after talking with a student that their message was altogether without rude intent. And sometimes messages come our way that are just hard to see anything but rude. Here's a common example. Mr. Smith, I know I got number 7 right. Is it wrong because I didn't spell it right? I don't think that's fair. Huh. Well, clearly this student doesn't understand that more than one exclamation point indicates yelling. According to the vast majority of instructors, this student comes across not only as angry, but also as disrespectful and rude. And the outcome is not likely to be beneficial to anyone. A much more effective message would look something like this. I was wondering if the reason for missing number 7 was because of my misspelling. If so, I understand and will pay closer attention the next time. Now, when it comes to doing a student a favor, like granting them extra credit or at the close of the semester when I'm looking at their 79% as a final percentage, what are the chances that my graciousness will kick in and I'll see that 79 as a B minus? Well, it depends. The truth is, some folks just don't have much empathy. They'd throw their closest friend or colleague under the bus if it benefited them, and I mean that idiomatically, of course. But most people are not at all this way. They simply make mistakes in their writing. In 2003, Lynn Truss wrote a book called Eats, Shoots, and Leaves. It resulted from her concern over the state of punctuation in the UK and the United States. In this book, she describes how rules are being relaxed in today's society. Her goal was to remind readers of the importance of punctuation in the English language, and she did so by mixing humor and instruction. The title is what's called a syntactic ambiguity. Here's the explanation on the back cover. A panda walks into a cafe. He orders a sandwich, eats it, then draws a gun and fires 2 shots in the air. Why? Asks the confused waiter as the panda makes toward the exit. The panda produces a badly punctuated wildlife manual and tosses it over his shoulder. I'm a panda, he says at the door. Look it up. The writer turns to the relevant entry in the manual and, sure enough, finds an explanation. Panda, large black and white bear-like mammal native to China. Eats, shoots, and leaves. Now, the joke works or turns on the ambiguity of the final sentence fragment. As intended by the author, eats is a verb, while shoots and leaves are the verb's objects. A panda's diet consists of shoots and leaves. However, the erroneous introduction of the comma gives the mistaken impression that the sentence fragment comprises 3 verbs, listing in sequence the panda's characteristic conduct. It eats, then it shoots, and finally it leaves. Ambiguity or confusion in this case is caused by one simple mark, the comma. Regardless of how or with whom we communicate, we rely on our ability to string together a group of words into a complete thought to form a sentence. Think about this example. Our study group reviewed the material for most of the meeting. We spent time watching video clips. Consider the different ways to interpret this sentence. Our study group reviewed the material for most of the meeting. We also spent time watching video clips. Or, our study group reviewed the material for most of the meeting. We spent time watching video clips. As you can tell, complete sentences are important for grouping words to communicate messages. If we don't use complete sentences to indicate these groupings, the meaning of the text can be unclear. There are situations in your life when sentences aren't a big deal. In a lab report for biology class, you might use a list of phrases to communicate your meaning. In a presentation, you might purposefully use an incomplete sentence for emphasis. In other situations, like academic writing or business letters, complete sentences are expected. Not only do they make your message easier to follow, but they also make your meaning clearer. And on this note, let me create an opportunity for 2 extra credit points. If you're interested, here's what to do. Send me an email with this entire statement included including your fill-in-the-blank response. Okay, so I need all of these words. It's probably wise to text using complete sentences because whatever you think. There's more than one right answer, and these extra credit points will be available until the due date and time of the quiz that corresponds with this lecture. In this lesson, you'll learn about the following sentence components: capitalization and punctuation, parts of speech, subject and predicate, and complete thought. Much of what we'll discuss will be a review of past lessons, but repetition is the mother of success. Practice makes perfect, all that. Complete sentences always start with a capital letter and end with a period, a question mark, or an exclamation point. Periods are used to end sentences that make a statement or relay information. The dog buried the bone. Question marks are used at the ends of sentences that ask a question, of course, or possibly request more information. Where did she bury the bone? Simply put, a question mark is used when you're asking your audience a direct question. It can be a little confusing when a sentence asks an indirect question or makes a statement about a question. Consider these examples. Do you know where the dog buried the bone? Versus, my mom wants to know if you know where the dog buried the bone. Direct questions ask the audience a question and end in a question mark. Indirect questions tell the audience about a question and end in a period. Exclamation points end sentences that convey emphasis or strong feeling. We finally found the bone. Think about each type of punctuation mark that can be used at the end of a sentence. How do you decide which one to use? Punctuation marks should fit the purposes of the sentence, of course. Sentences can usually be grouped into one of four purposes: declarative, interrogative, imperative, or exclamatory. Let's move from capitalization and punctuation to parts of speech. Parts of speech have unique functions in a sentence. We're going to review the 8 parts of speech and where to find them in a sentence. A noun is a word that represents a person, place, thing, event, or idea. They are the who and what in the sentence. Sometimes using or repeating too many nouns in one sentence or paragraph feels awkward. An easy way to add clarity and variety to your writing is to use a pronoun instead. A pronoun is a part of speech used to replace a noun or another pronoun. There are several ways to classify nouns. Common nouns name a general person, place, thing, event, or idea. General being the operative word. Proper nouns name a specific person, place, thing, event, or idea, specific being the operative word. A count noun is a noun that can be counted. A non-count noun is one that cannot, of course. There are 3 primary types of pronouns: personal, relative, and indefinite. This table lists just a few examples of each pronoun type. We've discussed nouns and pronouns. Now let's move on to verbs. We'll briefly discuss types of verbs and tenses of verbs. There are 3 verb types: actions, linking verbs, and helping verbs. Action verbs show physical or mental action. Linking verbs link the subject to a description. And helping verbs change the form of the main verb to grammatically fit into a sentence. Here are a few examples of each, along with a sample sentence. There are also three simple verb tenses: past tense, present tense, and future tense. Here are examples of each. Notice that past tense verbs change form. Most simply add ed to form the past tense, but some change form by changing their spelling altogether, such as the past tense verb in this example. The formula for this simple future tense verb includes the word will that's placed in front of the root form of the verb. Will run, will go, will play, etc. Now, let's move on to adjectives and adverbs. Adjectives are used to describe nouns or pronouns. Here are three examples where the adjectives are underlined. Believe it or not, there are 8 types of adjectives: descriptive, numeral, quantitative, demonstrative, interrogative, possessive, proper, and exclamatory adjective. This may seem daunting, but just remember that any word that describes a noun or a pronoun is an adjective. It's not going to really matter whether or not you know which kind of adjective it is. Adverbs describe verbs, thus adverbs. They add to the verb. Adverbs can also describe adjectives and other adverbs. Once again, in these 3 examples, the adverbs are underlined. There are 8 types of adverbs: adverbs of frequency, manner, place, time, degree, and then conjunctive adverbs. Let's now move on to prepositions. Prepositions are words that show relationships among people, places, things, events, and ideas. In this example, before is the preposition. Prepositional phrases are word groups made up of a preposition and the object of the preposition. In our first example, before dinner is the prepositional phrase. In this one, on my shelf is the prepositional phrase. Can you detect the prepositional phrase in this example? Yes, it's under the bed. There are 5 types of prepositions, and here's a table showing them along with examples of each. Let's now move on to conjunctions. A conjunction is a part of speech that connects 2 or more words, phrases, or clauses in a sentence. There are 3 types of conjunctions: coordinating, subordinating, and correlative conjunctions. A coordinating conjunction connects 2 related words or phrases in a sentence. It can also be used with a comma to combine 2 independent clauses. Here's an example: I wanted to go, so I skipped practice. Here's another: she likes chocolate and pickles, but she doesn't like them together. In both examples, the coordinating conjunction is underlined. Subordinating conjunctions introduce dependent clauses. While she was waiting, it began to rain. He will spread fresh straw after he mucks the stalls. Now, as is seen in the first example, when a dependent clause precedes or comes before an independent clause, a comma follows. A correlative conjunction specifies the relationship between words or word groups that they connect. And they always appear in pairs, as is seen in our examples: both and, neither nor. And finally, let's talk about interjections. Interjections are words or short groups of words that show emphasis or emotion. It can be followed by an exclamation point or a comma. In emails and letters, interjections are used as greetings, as is seen in these examples. You can also use interjections to emphasize words or feelings within a sentence or paragraph. Although interjections are rarely used in academic or professional writing, you probably use them often in personal writing. Interjections. Let's move from the parts of speech to subject and predicate. In this part of the lecture, we'll cover the following topics: subjects, subjects versus objects, predicates, verbs with other functions, and locating the subject and predicate. Before we focus on subjects, let's talk a bit about the subject and predicate in general. A complete sentence must always include a subject and a predicate. The subject is a noun or pronoun that indicates who or what the sentence is about, and the predicate indicates what the subject is or does in a sentence. In the following examples, the subject is boxed, the predicate is underlined. Let's look at one more example, this one being a bit perplexing, though certainly not terribly complicated. In this, your order was delayed until Friday. One might be tempted to think that the subject is your, but this is not the case. In order to answer the question, what is the subject? We must ask who or what the action is about. The action, in this case, was delayed. Now, who or what was delayed? Was it your? No. The order was delayed, not you. Order is the subject, and was delayed is the predicate. Now, let's hone in on subjects. Nouns and pronouns can serve various functions in a sentence. It's important to recognize these functions so that you can distinguish between the subject and other sentence components or parts. Subjects are usually stated explicitly as nouns or pronouns, as is seen in these examples. The subject does not always have to be the first word in the sentence. In most sentences, subjects come before verbs, but some sentences place the subject after or inside the verb. This is especially common in questions. Notice the subject in bold in this sentence. Moreover, the subject is not always stated explicitly. Sentences giving the audience a command or request contain an implied subject. In these kinds of sentences, the speaker is talking to the audience directly. Subjects can also be compound, and in these instances of compound subjects, they are linked by conjunctions. Okay, we honed in on subjects. Now let's compare subjects and objects. Although nouns and pronouns often function as subjects, they also often function as objects. When identifying the subject of a sentence, you can rule out the following types of objects: direct objects, indirect objects, and objects of prepositions. A direct object receives the action of the verb, as we see in these examples. The direct objects are in bold. Indirect objects receive the direct object, as we see in these examples. And the object of a preposition is a noun or pronoun that completes the meaning of a prepositional phrase, as we see in these examples. One more thing about pronouns. Notice that the function of a pronoun determines its case. There are three pronoun cases: subjective, objective and possessive. If the pronoun is used as the subject, it will be a subjective pronoun. And used as the object, of course, it will be the objective pronoun. And if the pronoun shows ownership, we call it the possessive pronoun. Now, let's touch on the topic of predicates. Like nouns and pronouns, verbs can take on a variety of forms that serve different purposes in sentences. Remember that predicates are often made up of a helping verb and a main verb. On your first day, you will read a book. Unfortunately, they were forced to leave. They are writing memoirs for the contest. These are all examples of a helping verb followed by a main verb. Like subjects, predicates can also be compound. In this sentence, the main verbs are linked by a conjunction. And. And now verbs with other functions. Verb forms can also be used as adjectives or nouns in a sentence. First, they can function as adjectives, as is seen in these two examples. In addition, verbs can also be used as nouns, as is seen in these two examples. Now, one test to determine if a verb is being used as a noun is to replace the word with it. It has been a passion of mine for a long time. And it was all I hoped for in that difficult class. In these cases, what would normally be considered verbs, we now know are being used as nouns. And lastly, on the topic of subject and predicate, let's discuss locating the subject and predicate. If you're having a difficult time identifying the subject and predicate in a sentence, follow these steps. First, put parentheses or brackets around any prepositional phrases. Next, find the predicate. And lastly, ask yourself who or what is doing the action, or who or what is being described. Let's move from subject and predicate to our last topic, complete thought. In addition to containing subjects and verbs, complete sentences must always express a complete thought. A complete thought means that the group or words is logically finished. If a group of words, or the group or words, contains a subject and a verb, but does not express a complete thought, it's known as a dependent clause. Let's consider the following examples. As Miriam smiled at the crowd, when the oven door spontaneously shattered, and that the music video depicted Neverland, are all dependent clauses. They're not complete thoughts. They depend upon an additional something for completeness. Depend or dependent clauses. They usually begin with a word that makes the rest of the sentence sound incomplete. And if this word is removed, the sentence expresses a complete thought, as is seen here. These examples are now complete sentences, or what we call independent clauses. They are independent clauses because they each have a subject and a verb and express a complete thought. In this lesson, we discussed the following sentence components: capitalization and punctuation, parts of speech, subject and predicate, and complete thought. Remember, repetition is the mother of success, practice makes perfect, and all that stuff. Thanks for listening.